My mom would often say that one of the great surprises of her life is that people are irrational. But as I've come to understand people, they become very rational.
This is Sharilyn Green. Welcome to the Grandpa Channel. We believe we're all more alike than different. Every person has a story, and every story has the power to help us see our own story a little more clearly. Today's guest is Sharilyn Green. I've known Sharilyn for nearly 50 years. She's a wife, a mother, a marriage and family therapist, and one of the wisest listeners I've ever met. In this conversation, we talk about what life has taught her through family, hardship, faith, and years of sitting with people in some of their most difficult moments. It's a conversation about empathy, about slowing down before we judge, and about discovering that when we begin to understand someone's story, they often make a lot more sense than we first imagine. Let's listen. We have a wonderful guest today, Sharilyn Green. So welcome to the Grandpa Channel.
Thank you, Steve.
Give us a little bit of an idea, kind of the arc of your life, of how did you get to the point that you're at right now, Sharilyn?
Probably what was most significant about my childhood is I got to live in Australia for 3 years. And that was a life-changing experience for me as a little girl, just to have that opportunity. Then I got married, and my husband and I joined the Army and then started into medical school. And so that was a journey of about 14 years. We lived in a lot of cool places and had a lot of great experiences, and it was also hard, very hard journey for him, trying him to be an orthopedic surgeon. We had 5 kids. I learned a lot through all of that. Also had really great but growing experiences that I hope we'll talk about today. Maybe one of the most prominent is our son-in-law developed ALS and lived with us for 5 or 6 years. And then when I was 60, I decided that I wanted to finish my schooling and finished a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And so I'm working now as a therapist and just loving what I'm learning through all of that.
What has your life taught you the hard way?
I think I've just learned how complicated life is and that everyone's usually doing their best. Like everyone, I've gotten more quiet, less judgmental the older I get. I hope I feel a lot of compassion for how, what life has handed people. We just don't know until we're in people's shoes what it's like. I love the quote by one of our faith leaders, Elder Maxwell, who says, when you're not being stretched at the foot of your own cross, to be at the foot of someone else's cross. Maybe that's one of the things that I've tried to learn in life. When I'm not on my own cross being stretched, what can I do to be at the foot of someone else's and their own challenges? I've learned that life is hard, that God is not afraid to ask us to do hard things. He's just not. And that's what we're here to do, and that hopefully we can be there for each other in those hard times. And what a gift connection is in those things. I'm so passionate about connections and relationships and how they bless us in this journey that we're all on.
Have you had an experience or two that's really brought those lessons kind of home to roost?
Yeah, I've learned that there are some challenges that are very public and very comfortable for people to respond to. For example, our son, when he was diagnosed with ALS, the outpouring in our community of support for him through those years, and his wife, our daughter, was staggering. I can't even begin to tell you what, as you can imagine, people did from start to finish through the whole thing and continue to do. Other journeys that have been more challenging for me is our oldest son is gay. We have a transgender daughter. And those are challenges that people aren't always sure what to do when that becomes, a part of your family and your life. And yet people have reached out in beautiful ways. And that sometimes there's so much quietly hidden in people's hearts that we don't know about, and to remember that and to be sensitive to that. My mom would often say that one of the great surprises of her life is that people are irrational. I can't tell you how often I even grew up hearing her say that. And so I, in some ways, just kind of took that as gospel truth. But as I've become a therapist and been able to have the privilege to sit with people really in sacred places in their life, I said to my mom one day, Mom, I don't agree with you anymore on that statement. As I've come to understand people it actually makes perfect sense. When you can be in those places where you understand where their childhoods, where they've been, it starts to be very rational how they live life. And one of my favorite titles of a book is it's one by Oprah Winfrey, and I think Brad Perry, I think is his name. He's a neurosurgeon, but the book is entitled not What's Wrong with You, but What Happened to You. I love that. And if we could say to people, instead of always thinking or saying, goodness, what's wrong with you? You're so irrational. Please tell me what happened to you. I'd love to know more. And then it becomes very rational. So yeah, it's been a sweet conversation with my mom over the years, with a little bit of a twist in it towards the end with me for her.
It's one thing that kind of comes up in my life is sometimes I agree with what you're saying, but I either lack the energy or maybe even the desire sometimes to say, what is it? Help me understand where you're coming from with this and what kind of experiences. And obviously, you have to be in a place where people feel comfortable with you. And I'm ashamed that I'm not more open to, I've got to find out what would you be so kind as to share your outlook. But sometimes I just don't feel like I want to dig any deeper. That's not a good place to be.
But, Steve, I do want to add to that. Yeah, people have different capabilities as far as, people. We all know people don't say I hate people. So we all have different capabilities. But one thing I guess I've learned as a therapist is the importance of good questions. To be able to have, I just think it's basic human kind of 101 that we're not taught a little bit better. The types of questions that we can ask people that are connecting questions that don't put people on the defensive, that help us really get quickly to people's hearts. And so, questions like I say all the time, please help me understand, or if your pain could talk to me, what would it say? Or if I could open the window to your heart, what would I see? I wish we were better trained as just humans as to how to really find out how people are and how they're doing. And we really aren't trained to do that at all.
Don't you think that people aren't going to share if they don't feel like you care? I suppose we could ask the right question, but we don't have the correct sort of secret sauce that we really love them and really want to find out what's going on.
Yeah, there's so much vying for our attention. I think one of the greatest gifts we can give people is our undivided attention. To give people eye contact, to be present, put our phones down. I'm sitting in my office right now. I actually have a quote here on my wall that I love by Simone Weil, and she did it in 1942, which is the most basic and universal human needs include the need to be seen and understood, the need to be taken seriously, the need to be appreciated, the need to be paid attention to. The love of our neighbor in all its fullness simply means being able to say, what are you going through? It's just such a gift when we can see people, be present with people, give them our full, undivided attention. Sometimes someone will do that for me and it takes my breath away. Yeah. As you said, if you're someone that's really sitting there with their eyes on me with no other distractions and just totally focused, wanting to learn more about me, it literally takes my breath away. It's a gift.
I just feel so honored that they would be so kind of locked and loaded.
Yeah.
And I have a couple of friends, one in particular that is like that. Man, he just bores in, not in an obtrusive way. And I would love to be that kind of person, but I don't know if I am. How do you gain skills? Is it a skill gathering thing, Sharilyn, or is it a desire, or is it a gift, or what is it? How would you, if somebody came to you and said, I want to connect with more people, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I love the word that you used, desire, right? First of all, I think you have to have the desire. I think you have to have experienced yourself, like you said. I love how you described him, locked and loaded. When you've experienced that for yourself, I think you know what that feels like and what you want to do to give that to people. But I love the idea in life that we get to practice. Sometimes we think you either have it or you don't. And I love the idea that we can get better at things. And so, the art of compassionate listening, Thich Nhat Hanh, he's one of my favorite people on that. How we can allow people to unburden their hearts. We're so busy thinking of our response that we don't even hear what they're saying. So to practice sitting with people, intentionally setting aside that strong urge to be plotting your response and to really listen, and then to listen with compassion. So I think the practice of just deep listening and practicing that. And then, second of all, the practice of asking good questions that help people feel safe and seen, and that you truly want to understand some of their deepest places. So I think it's about practicing and desire.
I'm not trying to get argumentative with you, but our family situations present these fabulous opportunities to practice these things, but yet our kids and other family members, extended family members, have the ability to repeatedly punch our buttons so that I don't want to go there, or I'm so angry that I can't really practice empathetic listening. And I know that's on me, but it's kind of like I think, well, I can't help it, but I can help it, and I've got to help it. And I'll tell you a quick story. I'll try to protect the anonymity of the individual. When I go out to lunch with close family members, I usually have an agenda. I'm sorry, but I do. And I had quite a list for this particular individual. And I was pre-exercise. And so the lunch appointment came, and I felt like I needed to dissipate my anger and frustration. So I knelt and prayed. And I had a really strong feeling that I was not to go over the agenda items, which I was really looking forward to. Mm-hmm. But what I was supposed to say is, what can I do for you? Mm-hmm. And then I sat back in the restaurant booth, and it was the right thing to say. And it would have been an almost catastrophically bad lunch if I had gone down that path. And it was surprising. But what I found is that it encouraged my loved one to say things and start talking. And so sometimes I'm saved from myself. I wish I was saved from myself more often. And I think, how would you kind of apply some of these empathetic listening specifically to sons and daughters and grandchildren? What would you say to them?
Man, that's such a great question, because that is the hardest place for us to do it, right? There's a heightened emotion there. And I think it's helpful to remember the biology. When we feel a trigger, alarms go off inside of us. And so slowing things down and creating more intention around that space, around a trigger, and starting to understand, so when this trigger happens, how do I cope? What do I do to protect myself? What's the secondary emotion that someone, my son or my daughter, will see? Usually it's anger, frustration, contempt, some of those really awful emotions that we just so immediately kind of show when we're distressed or triggered. And so that's what they would see. But underneath that usually is fear or pain or hopelessness or discouragement. Mm-hmm. And they're usually, what we're doing is we're protesting some kind of deep unmet attachment need. Am I enough? Am I lovable? Do I matter? Do you see me? They're really protests. So understanding, the cycles that we get into in our relationships and in ourself, and then understanding the biology of how quickly that, our brain can just take over and create. So slowing it down and really being intentional about that space after the trigger, and practicing. Okay, here's an opportunity, like you said, our families are our greatest laboratory to learn this. Something happens with our husband or our wife, our child, that's where it's the hardest. And to say, wow, here's a chance to practice what I want to show up as. And to recognize that those cortisol, whatever, are going to ignite, but to practice slowing down. And then, how do I want to respond? What am I protesting? Or I love also to look behind their anger, frustration, and think, what's the pain behind this? That's another thing I'll ask myself. In my closest relationships, when I see their protective responses come out, which can only trigger me more, I'll try to pause and say, what's the pain behind this and how can I get to the pain? Because then you can dissipate it more quickly.
How do you find out about the pain, Sherilyn? Because what if you have a child that is kind of walled up and isn't in the mood to kind of share what the pain is? Maybe I suppose you could rely on inspiration and your love for, that child. But it's I wish I had a crystal ball. Mine's shattered in a million different pieces. Absolutely useless. But I find myself really struggling sometimes to see things better. And it's not for lack of a desire, although my desire could be shaped by my anger, which I know is something that I've got to take out of the equation. Let me ask you this question. So if you're really angry at a child, what's the best way to dissipate that anger and get to a better place?
Yeah, so I think the quickest way to dissipate something like that is you have to be regulated yourself. And that requires self-discipline and self-control, but people want to be validated. And so we think that means we have to agree. I love teaching this. We think to validate someone means that we have to agree with them. But to say to your child, when I think about this the way maybe you're thinking about this, that makes so much sense to me. Or I can see why you feel this way. That doesn't mean I agree with what you're doing, but there's something about that immediately will diffuse, usually volatile situations. When someone feels seen and validated like that, then the temperature comes down. I mean, that just takes it down immediately because someone goes, oh, wow, I don't have to fight for this. They're willing to see why this is important to me. Or, yeah, even just that, I can see why this matters to you. That makes sense to me, this matters to you. And so just being able to use some really simple statements like that, I think will diffuse things pretty quickly.
So, Sherilyn, I'm unburdening here. What about in a situation where you have a parent or parents who have blown something out of proportion or they've screwed up? Not in fisticuffs or anything like that, but how would you go back and kind of try to undo what was said and done and kind of in essence, a do-over? How would you deal with that?
You're talking about for a child that's been hurt by a parent.
Yeah.
And that's an epidemic in our country right now. So many hurt children and brokenhearted parents. There's an epidemic of cutoffs and estrangements that we're watching, and we actually see a lot of that in our office. And so for the child's part, it would depend if it was a child or an adult child. We always like to talk about parental intent. What was the intent of your parents? Even if they hurt you, what was their intent? But also how important it is to have safe and honest conversations that allow people to get to the vulnerabilities, the places where, they've been in pain or they've been afraid, or, again, we can get into these cycles that just go nowhere between parents and children. And so for a child to come say to a parent, I see everything that you've done for me, maybe, or your efforts, but you've hurt me. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to be able to tell you what that hurt's been like for me. To do it in a way that doesn't engender defensiveness and to be humble about it, but to be honest, you've hurt me and it's important to talk about it. And I'd love to talk about it with you. I'm hoping that we can figure this out together. That would be AP living, if a child could do that for a parent. We want to justify everything that we've done for them or to argue, how can you not see it this way? If we'll set that aside and again, just say, I can see that I caused you harm. I want to know more. Can you tell me more about the harm I've caused you? I want to hear, I want to listen, and then listen. If we can do things like that.
Listening would come into play, right?
Yes, yeah, and just listen. And you wouldn't say anything about, at that point, defending your own opinion, that you would want them to feel held and seen and validated. We talk a lot about impact, right? It doesn't matter so much what we do, it's what was the impact on the other person. We could sit there and argue forever, I did this and this and this, or it wasn't like this for me, or that's not right. The important part is there's been some kind of impact on that child that's hurt them. And if they can feel seen and validated and respected in their experience, then I think we have more of a chance to heal.
It's it's kind of it's slow work with us.
Yeah. It's slow work though, but when that becomes the norm rather than the exception, then the repairs happen so quickly. Then
Mhm.
it's safe to come to each other and say, "You've hurt me," and there's deposits in place, and so the work speeds up if we can lay the foundation.
If a person is lacking in empathy,
Mm.
how does one, in your opinion, how does one gain empathy? I know that's a hard question. So,
My first thought was more experience with hard things.
yeah,
You know, the harder
please.
life is, it seems like the more empathetic we become. But
Right.
yeah, people, those are natural gifts sometimes people have, right? We all have gifts, and sometimes empathy, compassion, people are so gifted with those, and others of us aren't. And so I think again, practicing, it's a gift we can practice. But slowing down enough to say, well, what would it be like for them, or what's this like for them, and spending time thinking about that, putting ourselves in others' shoes, that always will help us feel more empathetic to someone. We just don't do it enough.
So this is kind of a great lead-in for you, Sherilyn, and putting false modesty aside, okay? If you were to think about one or two or three superpowers that you have, I'm of the opinion everyone has superpowers.
Well, the first thing that jumps to my mind is that I get to practice right now doing something that's hard for, I think, all of us and hard for me. And that's to accept that I do have gifts and to be able to tell you about them. I'm going to practice that right now because in the past, my tendency would be like so many,
Oh no, 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 yeah,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
so it's an opportunity for me to practice saying, yeah, I have been blessed with gifts, and thank you so much for asking. I think one thing I value about myself is to be a safe person. I want to be someone that people can come to and just kind of breathe around, where they don't have to measure their words, where they feel cherished and valued just the way they are, is something that's so important to me. And so I think that that's something I do well is I create safety. I hope to create a safe place for people to land in life. I hope they feel like they can come to me with whatever it is, and I will honor that and be respectful of that and love and cherish them. I think I'm a safe person. Along with that, I really do love to listen. I try to listen to people. I would rather listen than talk. Honestly, I get uncomfortable talking, so this is hard for me to be on a podcast. I believe that we need better listeners in the world, so I think I'm a good listener, and I think that's an important skill to have. I am able to keep a lot of balls in the air.
Mhm.
I'm quiet about that too. I really don't want people to know how many balls I'm keeping in the air because I like all the balls I'm keeping in the air. People knew how many balls I was keeping in the air, they'd probably be like, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't be doing that. But I like living that way. I love so many things. And yeah, I've developed over the years, maybe with 6 kids and moving overseas and all the things, the ability to hold space for a lot of things and people. Oh, thank you,
I think
Steve.
it's interesting that you find it uh, more easy to talk about them now than you were a young mom or when you were doing this, that, or the other thing. I wonder if part of it is when you recognize and see the hand of God in your life. One of the great things about being 70, almost 71, is I more clearly see the hand of God in my life. And I go, oh, that's why that happened. Or, that was really hard, but it led me to this choice or to that choice. How have you seen the hand of God in your life, Sharilyn?
Yeah, I like to call it divine orchestration.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve, I would agree with you. I'm also at a place where that is becoming more obvious to me. Maybe God's had time to work in us because we're older. Yeah, I can't even begin to tell you about the divine orchestration that's happened for me to be sitting here in a therapy room right now, 60 years of age, and I see how my whole life has been preparing me for not just this, but other things, hard things, journeys with my children, experiences, weaknesses that I've had, all of those things, and just meeting the right people at the right time. I see so clearly that divine orchestration that you're talking about, and I'm so grateful with you for a God who orchestrates our lives, and I believe he does that for all of us.
I
Sometimes
believe
you
it
can't
does.
feel it. Yeah, you can't. There are times when life is so bad, like you said, he piles it on, and you think, what in the world? And then, I don't know, 15 years later, you go, oh my goodness, he was tutoring me and preparing me for some of the most beautiful seasons and gifts I couldn't even imagine.
I didn't get it at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
You
me
know,
neither.
I
Yeah.
just felt like that maybe God was busy putting out other fires and,
Mm,
and kind of had forgotten me, but he never has.
no.
And that's what 70 years will also teach you, that it's a constant thing. There may be periods of quiet, uh, or maybe it's because I'm not listening as much as need to. Final question for you.
Okay.
If there's a 28-year-old woman who is perhaps single, has had a few rough things happen to her, and is trying to deal with things, what would you hope that listening to this podcast, what would you hope that she would take away from this podcast?
That is another great question because there's so many in that situation, right? I would tell this person how much we need what they have to offer and in the life that they are living. I see so many single women who understand that, who have risen to the occasion and are contributing to the world in places that I, as a young mother, could not do. I didn't have the bandwidth to do it. And I have a daughter who's, single and not married. I have a couple of daughters who are single and not married. And the difference they're making, a daughter who teaches fourth grade and the amount of children that she has blessed over the years, to feel settled and to feel grounded in the life that they have right now, whatever that is. I would encourage that beautiful 28-year-old to feel more grounded and settled and to trust that God is in charge. He is orchestrating their life, and for whatever reason they're needed in the life that they're living, and that there is so much that they can offer that so many other of us can't with their own gifts and abilities and the circumstances now that they're in. And this is easy to say. I would hold some of the pain, of maybe some of their dreams not working out in the ways immediately that they hoped. I think that's painful. I wouldn't want to diminish that. I would want to hold that so carefully and validate that for someone. Of course, so many of these beautiful young women want to be married, to have children, and that's opportunities not provided right now. And yet I see so clearly the gift they are to the world in other ways that we are doing the things that they long to do can't begin to do.
Wow. You've given me a lot to think about, Sharilyn. There is a kind of a special kind of peace and calm that you have that I think that is a superpower for you. And so thank you for sharing your wisdom with us here on the Grandpa Channel.
You're welcome, Steve. Can I tell you my favorite part of this podcast before we leave?
Yeah, please.
My favorite part was the emotion in your voice when you talked about that lunch with your child. That was so tender to me to hear you talk about that. That was the best part of the podcast. So thank you for sharing that experience and for the emotion that was there. It's made me emotional to think about you responding as a father in such a beautiful way. So super grateful for that.
Yeah. You get a lot of moments to grow and get frustrated and learn things when you have kids. Thanks so much for being on the show.
You're so welcome. It's been my privilege and honor.
Sharilyn opened this conversation by saying that the more she's come to understand people, the more rational they become. I think that's really what today was about. Every one of us is carrying experiences that shape how we see the world. And when we're willing to become curious instead of quick to judge, we often discover that people make a lot more sense than we first imagine. Every story has two stories, the one you just heard and the ones it stirs in your own life. If you'd like to spend a few minutes with that second story, we've created a reflection journal with a few prompts inspired by today's episode. You'll find it in the description. That's why we do this. We believe we're all more alike than different. Every person has a story, and every story helps us see our own story a little more clearly. Keep looking for the stories that connect us all. Until next time, this is Rivers from the Grandpa Channel, signing off.
We think to validate someone means that we have to agree with them. But to say, when I think about this the way you're thinking about this, I can see why you feel this way. When someone feels seen and validated like that, then the temperature comes down.